Hey, I'm Adam. I'm going to turn this sci-fi mech into a science fantasy war machine. Let's make somewhere new. I love snap-fit Bandai kits, and this one was no exception, but since it's Gunpla adjacent, I felt the need to try this. Yeah, I didn't love that. Anyway. I decided to make a mech as a way to fix some past mistakes in my world building. Specifically my previous mech, which I felt leaned too far into sci-fi and didn't really fit my aesthetic. And I also did not like the paint job, which is a problem I run into here again today. I started with this very basic model kit as the frame for my mech because it had not only the pose but the proportions that I wanted. So I followed the instructions exactly as written to better understand the form of the kit. If you haven't built one of these Bandai kits before, I really recommend it. It's probably the most fun I have putting together models, and I've put together a lot of models. Once it was complete, I started digging through my very disorganized bits boxes. I stuck almost exclusively to Warhammer 40k parts, mostly from my Thousand Suns and Night kits. So thank you, Zinch, for your contribution. I also shied away from using other Gunpla kits, as I felt it didn't really add to the aesthetic that I was looking for. I spent most of my time cleaning up parts, removing unnecessary spikes, skulls, and typical 40k iconography that made everything read too clearly as Warhammer. Honestly, the majority of the work on this project was just chopping up bits to make them fit together, or at least looked like they belonged together. A sharp blade, sanding sticks, and sprue goo, which is just leftover plastic bits from sprues melted into an almost empty bottle of plastic cement, were integral to getting the shapes and forms that I wanted. Honestly, a lot of this project was looking through the bits box, fiddling with pieces, seeing where they fit, and whether or not I liked how that looked. I did a lot off camera because it was very tedious and honestly not that exciting to watch. The first things that I removed from the model itself were the main arm cannons. I replaced them with a huge curved sword and sort of a mid-range electrical weapon, I guess, that felt more grounded in the world than a standard rifle would. The weapon was made by randomly gluing together styrene and spare bits until I eventually figured out what it is that I wanted it to be. When it comes to kitbashing, I have a couple important but very obvious simple tips to get the things the way that you want them. First, look for shapes that almost fit together and use them to create a new shape. Use simpler shapes to cover the gaps and ugly joints that are left behind. And then fill gaps with whatever material works and make it look like it serves some purpose. But don't feel like you need to explain that purpose, right? As long as you push through the ugly phase of kitbashing, painting, crafting, things will eventually start taking shape. My main goal here was to cover up anything that looked too smooth or precisely machined, and to replace it with curves and armor that felt more at home in my fantasy setting. Something I decided early on in my return was that a visual consistency would be draping clothing and cloth and cloaks and the like, for specific reasons in the story. So sometimes parts don't fit together the way you expect. So don't be afraid to use styrene, green stuff, craft foam, balsa wood, or whatever else you have on hand to be able to bridge the gap between two pieces and make them fit. Now you can see the model beginning to bulk up, but because I'm removing material at the same time, it never really feels overly clunky, at least in my opinion. I'm also thinking ahead towards painting. Where can I add texture? Where can I create interesting surfaces that give me more options later? Here I'm mixing up some very old Milliput to fill the worst of the gaps. So let's actually see if it still works, because I haven't opened it in 2 years. I could have used more bits and pieces to fill these gaps or to cover these up, but there were a lot of them and I didn't want this to be too busy looking. After all of that small, tedious, busy work, I decided to build a small, simple base. I started with my standard Walmart wooden canvas and covered it with a cheap Ready Board foam core from Dollar Tree, which has paper that peels off very easily. Then I just carved away some of the foam to create a slate slope and add a bit more visual interest. I didn't want this to be some large, sprawling area, just somewhere that I could add some color and contrast. I'd be surprised if most of my viewers weren't familiar with Boylai Hobby Time. But for anyone who isn't, this is his terrain paste recipe: plaster, Mod Podge, craft paint, and sometimes enough water to thin it to your preferred consistency. I spread the mixture across the base and used a silicone sculpting tool to create a wave-like pattern, as if the sand had been shaped by the wind. I used some bark I found outside that I baked at a low temperature in the oven to kill any bacteria. I pressed it firmly into the wet paste and began brushing some of the material up and around to make them look like they'd been there a long time. The terrain paste gave me the shape that I wanted, but not the texture, so I sprinkled over some non-sanded tile grout and sealed it in with isopropyl alcohol. I'm not alone in saying that the best part of any kitbash is priming away all of those random colors and shapes and finally seeing it become one coherent object. I used an airbrush for most of the terrain, focusing darker colors in the low areas and brighter colors on the raised surfaces. I used the very same approach on the stones. I started with warmer base colors, highlighted with brighter tones, followed by a thin brown wash and then a black wash to fill in the cracks. And of course I finished everything with everyone's favorite, dry brushing. I used more of my cheap plastic palm trees that are entirely too glossy and fake looking. I repainted them in the same colors, but with matte paint. Okay, so here's where things took a turn. I hate this paint scheme. You probably do too. And I don't blame you. I stopped before I got too far and wasted even more time. So I went back, repainted the base color to a dark navy, and used the airbrush to highlight up to a brighter color, trying to match the Ishvaran story from last week. Then I rebuilt the palette from there with a much better color balance, in my opinion. And I'm very glad that I did. I really love where this model ended up and dread where it could have gone. It feels more subtle and intentional, while at the same time being appropriately bold. Also, since returning, I've started doing this thing where when I paint, I use a drier brush and use these long, rough brush strokes, not worrying too much about smoothness or consistency, creating a very animated, painterly look. I want to keep pushing this technique because I think it gives my models a more interesting look to them. I don't know of any other mini painters who paint like this, but if you know of anyone who does, I'd love to know who they are so I can learn from them. Along with learning how to sculpt, learning how to better enjoy painting and to find my style is something that I really want to start doing. After finishing up the model with the necessary highlights to bring it into where I feel was a good place, it was time for assembly. I glued down the trees, I dusted the base with pigment powders of yellow ochre, and then finally painted the rim black to tie everything together. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, share, anything that helps get the word out so that people can learn how to make somewhere new. It's my job and my desire to inspire people and to help them feel like they can make something of their own. So with that being said, I'll see you in the next one.